Welcome to Adam's History Corner, where Steve and Jesse learn something new about the past.
There are two things. Number one, most Americans, despite it being one of the most talked about things that in American history, the Constitution. Americans do not know anything about the American Revolution. It's scary. Number two, there is no American Revolution, and there is absolutely no victory without France. Not even a question.
What if
America
I don't know
today,
what the American Revolution is?
So I'll tell you in a second. The American Revolution, America does not exist today without France.
Well,
Period.
there was like
End of
one
story.
French guy in the Mel Gibson movies.
Yeah, there was. Yeah. Well, okay. So at the last battle of the last major engagement of the American Revolution,
Which
there were
is
18
what?
Yorktown. There's Yorktown. I think it's South Carolina or North Carolina. It's Yorktown. Or no, it's Virginia. You've got General Cornwallis of the British, which is the most British name.
It really is.
And then you've got Washington, and then you've got two French commanders. You've got a land commander and a sea commander. Now there was a British-led expedition to relieve General Cornwallis, who was stuck inside this fort at Yorktown, Virginia. The French fleet came up from the Caribbean, because that's where a lot of their colonies were, defeated the British in Chesapeake Bay, and then, jumped in and started, sieging this place.
What are the two sides?
So the American Revolution, there's the rebels, the Americans in America, and then there's the British who own America.
Okay. That's more clear.
So you've got that. And then the French are like, hey, great opportunity to screw Britain. So we're going to ally with this upstart French army. So here's the problem. The Articles of Confederation, which were the documents signed in 1776, don't allow the Congress, which still exists today, to tax states. Initially, what everybody wanted was, it's like, oh, we're a bunch of little states and we're going to be our own little countries, but we'll kind of be like a federation, which is essentially how America's built. So the Americans are like, yeah, we're going to fight the British, the preeminent power in the world, but we're not going to tax anybody because we're trying to get rid of the British who are taxing us. So we can't pay our soldiers. By the end of the war, there were some soldiers, officers specifically, who had not been paid in 6 years. They were paid in IOUs. And at the end of the war, there was a guy who, and I think his last name was Morris. He actually paid soldiers 3 months' pay in his division because he was rich and they had no money. And so to wrap this up and to be very, very quick about it, not only was desertion rampant, everybody talks about the Continental soldiers. What a great group of heroes. Yeah, they were. They never got paid. They never got fed, often didn't have shoes, and then left. They just bounced. They were like, you know what? Screw this. I'm out of here. And I don't blame them. But at the last battle, the major engagement, there are more French soldiers on the field than there are Americans. So your last major engagement in that war, the French essentially are the major force. It's France versus England, and America's there. So we're talking about 10,000 French sailors and ships and troops on the ground, and then about 8,000 American troops as well. The French funded and created the American Revolution. Now, it's a damn good thing they did. America, believe it or not, is the longest running consecutive government in the world right now. It's the longest running. Now, when they obviously hammered some stuff out in the late 1880s to figure out, they had to eventually learn to tax people properly. And Americans from their inset do not like to be taxed. Don't blame them. They were able to, and this is so fascinating, they were able to get tons of loans from the French. It bankrupted the French monarchy. The French monarchy called something in the 1790s called what was called the Estates General, which is a meeting of the lords, the peasants, who are called the sans-culottes, and they all come together, and they're trying to figure out how to tax France to pay back all the money that they need to pay back because the Americans can't pay them back for the Revolutionary War. That leads to a chain of events. King gets his head chopped off. Then a bunch of other people get their heads chopped off under Robespierre, and then Napoleon Bonaparte takes over. So the American Revolution that France founded created their own revolution as well 20 years later. So that's fascinating. But if you go back and you look through it, they know people think that they always talk about Washington, and Washington was amazing, incredible. But there's no way that Washington's in a position to beat the British without the French and without the French pouring piles of money. We're talking, they said back, I think the estimate is 80 million livres, which is 80 million pounds back then. Just
Right.
insane. I think it's like $1 billion in today's dollar. Crazy money.
Now, why did they want to do this?
Because they wanted to fuck over Britain.
Okay.
That's the only reason.
Okay.
That's it. Because they lost. It's funny. They lost the 7 Years' War, which was about 15 years before that, which may or may not have been started by George Washington. There's a story about that. But essentially, they went head to head, and they went head to head in North America in this war. They went head to head in Europe in this war, and the British come out on top. They get Canada, which is what is now Canada, and Quebec. And Quebec at that time incorporated Michigan and Illinois as well. Like, Quebec was huge. It was this gigantic swath of land. And the Americans, what became America, they only became that way and only became so angry about this because the British then had to pay to garrison that territory and pay for the fact that they just won that war, because it's really expensive to conduct a war. So they start taxing the Americans. The Americans are pissed about it, and it starts the chain of events that creates the Revolutionary War. Now, the American soldiers that fought were brave. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying Washington wasn't a badass. He was. He was not a perfect man. That's another thing that Americans are all about. Well, he was perfect. He never lied. Well, no, he had a terrible temper. He owned slaves, although he freed them all towards the end. But this guy was a southern guy growing up in the 1700s. Of course, he had slaves and was not a perfect man at all. And so that it drives me crazy when people go, "Oh, Washington, he's the best man ever." Washington would say, "No, I'm not a perfect guy." There are so many things about the American Revolution that Americans take and go, "Well, we're just going to ignore all the other stuff that happens here." And it's not for any other reason other than that's what you're taught. However, it's my hot take is there is no American Revolution without France just going nana boo boo to the British. That's all it is. And you should check out the American Revolution. You should read your history on it, not just because it's your country, even if it's not, but it is one of the most fascinating geopolitical things that ever happened in the world. And that war, along with the 7 Years' War, in my mind, are two of the initial world wars because they happen on 3 different continents. The 7 Years' War happens in North America, Europe, and on India, like on the Indian Peninsula. Same with the American Revolution, except I don't believe India was involved. You have the Netherlands, Spain, France versus Britain, plus the American colonies. It's crazy. So anyway, that's my hot take. There is no United States today without France. The United States today exists because one king said "fuck you" to another.